The system said the case was closed. But one detail refused to stay buried. The killer had taken his time. He didn't just strike and run. He moved bodies. He covered mirrors with cloth. He lingered in a house with 8 dead people, including 6 children. And then he slipped away into the Iowa night, leaving behind evidence that the 1912 justice system struggled to preserve and interpret. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders. Not just a brutal crime, but a textbook case of how chaos at a crime scene, too many directions, and institutional weaknesses can fracture the search for truth. Imagine a small town in southwest Iowa, June 1912. Villisca was the kind of place where people left doors unlocked and knew their neighbors' routines. On the evening of June 9th, the Moore family hosted 2 young guests, Ina and Lena Stillinger, ages 8 and 12, for an overnight stay after a church program. Josiah Joe Moore, a respected businessman in his 40s, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman 11, Mary Catherine 10, Arthur 7, and Paul 5, along with the 2 Stillinger girls. 8 people total settled in for the night. The house was quiet. No signs of forced entry that raised immediate red flags. Neighbors later reported hearing nothing unusual. Then came the rupture. Sometime during the early morning hours of June 10th, someone entered the home carrying an axe that belonged to the family. All 8 victims were bludgeoned to death in their beds as they slept. The blows were so severe that many skulls were crushed beyond recognition. Doctors estimated the attacks happened in the dead of night. What makes this psychologically unsettling isn't just the violence, it's the control. The killer used the blunt side of the axe on many victims, something some analysts believe may have been an attempt to reduce noise. He arranged some of the bodies, including signs that some bodies may have been repositioned after death. Mirrors in the house were draped with clothing or cloth, as if to avoid his own reflection or some symbolic act. A lamp chimney was removed and placed carefully. A bloody footprint or 2 were noted, but later muddied. He wasn't in a frenzy of panic. He stayed. He acted with purpose. Then he left the axe behind and vanished. But this is where the investigation began to unravel. By 8 a.m. or so, a neighbor noticed the Moore house was unusually still. No chores, no movement. Concern grew. Someone tried the door. When they entered and discovered the horror, word spread like wildfire through the small town. Within minutes, the house was flooded with curious townspeople. Hundreds trampled through the rooms. People picked up the murder weapon. Souvenirs were reportedly taken by some onlookers, further compromising the scene. Bloody footprints multiplied as onlookers walked in and out. The sheriff struggled for hours to regain control. In modern terms, the crime scene was catastrophically contaminated. Basic evidence preservation. Fingerprints weren't even standard yet, but even rudimentary handling was lost. A fragment of a keychain not belonging to the family was found, but its value was compromised. The axe had been handled by countless people. Any chance of isolating the perpetrator's traces early on evaporated in the chaos of public horror and curiosity. This wasn't just bad luck. It reflected the procedural realities of 1912 rural law enforcement. No dedicated crime scene teams, no clear chain of custody protocols strong enough for a mass murder, and a community too shocked to stay back. The system fractured right at the starting line. The problem wasn't lack of suspects. It was too many directions and not enough clarity. Robbery was quickly ruled out. Money and valuables were untouched. So investigators looked closer to home and then outward. One early theory pointed toward local tensions. Josiah Moore had business and possible personal conflicts with a prominent local figure, State Senator Frank F. Jones. Some speculated Jones might have hired someone for revenge, possibly a man named William Blackie Mansfield, who was later suspected in other axe murders in the region. But these remained allegations and theories, never proven with solid evidence tying them directly to Villisca. Then there was Henry Lee Moore. No relation to the victims. A man later convicted of axe murdering his mother and grandmother. He became a person of interest because of the similar weapon and brutality, leading some investigators to consider whether he could have been linked to other similar crimes. Again, connections were circumstantial at best. The most psychologically intriguing suspect emerged later. Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had been in Villisca that weekend. Kelly had a documented history of mental instability, including a prior breakdown, odd behavior, peeping incidents, and even a conviction for sending obscene material. He had attended or been involved with the church event the victims participated in earlier on June 9. Kelly's behavior after the murders raised red flags for investigators. He left town shortly after the murders, spoke nervously about the case, and showed what some described as an unhealthy fixation. In 1917, 5 years later, he was arrested and, after intense questioning, signed a confession. He described religious motivations and claimed he had been guided by divine instruction. His confession included specific details about killing the upstairs victims first, then the downstairs ones. Yet Kelly recanted almost immediately, alleging coercion and pointing to his fragile mental state. At trial, a first jury deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. A second jury acquitted him outright in November 1917. The confession didn't hold under scrutiny, and questions lingered about whether his knowledge came from being the killer, from hearing gossip, or from a disturbed mind feeding on the town's trauma. Behavioral analysis here is tricky even today. The killer showed planning and calm. Covering mirrors might suggest shame, superstition, or an attempt to depersonalize the scene. The selective use of the axe's blunt side points to someone trying to control the sound and the act. Moving bodies afterward suggests either ritualistic elements, a need for a final positioning, or an attempt to stage the scene in some way. Kelly's possible pedophilic tendencies and presence near the children that day fit a certain profile of someone with warped impulses toward vulnerability. But many details remain unclear, whether they prove guilt or simply coincidence amplified by his eccentricity and the era's limited understanding of mental illness. Other leads: transients, possible copycats linked to similar unsolved axe murders in the Midwest around that time, added layers of noise. Public and media pressure mounted fast. Small-town gossip mixed with national headlines. Every new rumor pulled investigators in fresh directions. Early on, the coroner's inquest happened quickly, but the foundation was already shaky due to the contaminated scene. Interviews relied heavily on neighbor statements and townspeople tips rather than forensic anchors. In an era before widespread fingerprinting, blood typing, or criminal databases, cases often hinged on confessions, alibis, and motive, which were abundant but contradictory. Procedural breakdowns were evident. Failure to secure the perimeter immediately, allowing evidence tampering and loss. Bias toward local suspects or quick theories may have narrowed focus prematurely. Later, when Kelly was tried years after the fact, memories had faded, evidence degraded further, and the passage of time made reliable reconstruction harder. The justice system succeeded in giving Kelly a fair trial process. He was not railroaded into conviction despite the confession and his odd profile. Juries showed skepticism toward a potentially coerced statement from a man with mental health issues. That reflects some institutional integrity. But the broader failure was in building a case that could ever survive the initial chaos. Too many suspects, too little preserved clarity. The problem wasn't absence of leads. It was the inability to eliminate them rigorously. Here is the deepest psychological and systemic contradiction. The killer almost certainly spent time in that house after the murders, long enough to perform deliberate, almost ceremonial acts like draping mirrors and repositioning bodies. Yet in a town that mobilized quickly once the bodies were found, no one was identified in the immediate aftermath in a way that led to a solid arrest. Someone capable of that level of composed brutality walked away clean, while the investigation drowned in its own footprints, literally and figuratively. The very public horror that should have helped catch the killer instead destroyed the evidence needed to identify him. Was it a local with a personal grudge who knew the house and town well enough to blend back in? A transient who slipped onto a train at dawn? A disturbed individual like Kelly whose confession held a kernel of truth before unraveling under pressure? Or someone whose mind operated with a chilling detachment we still struggle to profile today? It remains unclear whether the full truth was ever within reach once that front door swung open to the crowd on June 10, 1912. The problem wasn't lack of suspects. It was too many directions and not enough clarity, and a justice system not yet equipped to cut through the noise when a crime scene turned into a public spectacle. What do you think happened? Was the killer someone the town already knew, hiding in plain sight? Or did the system's early fractures let a calculated murderer disappear forever? Comment below with your theories. If this case of investigative chaos and lingering questions hit hard, check out our playlist on historic justice failures. The search for truth doesn't end when the headlines fade. Thanks for watching the True Crime Report. Stay sharp. Justice often fails not because it doesn't try but because the cracks form before anyone realizes how deep they run.